Okay, I think we'll get started now, if you're okay with that. So good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on stress and resilience. As a business, we recognise the importance of looking after ourselves, particularly in these strange and unprecedented times. That's why we're running this webinar. It's live and it's going to be recorded, so it will be available to view on the intranet in the next day or so. Everybody will be muted during the webinar. So I'm now going to pass you over to Geraldine Joaquim, who is going to be presenting this webinar. Thank you, Geraldine.
Thanks very much, Angela. So I'm going to start just by sharing my screen. So hopefully everybody can see that. Let's wait until it just goes on to the show. There we go. So thank you very much, Angela, for putting this webinar on. And as you mentioned, it is about managing personal stress, but really beyond that, into building resilience. We are going to be going through quite a lot quite quickly. There's a lot to go through. But before we start, if you hover down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little box that pops up that says Q&A. If you've got any questions, if you want to pop them in there, that kind of just sends them into one area, and they're also anonymous. You can also use the chat, either sending private messages between each other or to everybody. But any questions would be really good if you put them in the Q&A. So we are going to be looking at managing stress, or rather how to make that stress work for you, and then moving through into building resilience so that you can thrive in life. A very quick introduction of who I am, how I come to be sitting here in front of you giving this talk. I spent about more than 20 years working in international marketing. I've seen the inside of Heathrow Airport, sat on more planes than I care to remember, and also at the same time raised a young family. So I got to know stress fairly well. A few years ago, I retrained as a clinical hypnotherapist and psychotherapist, and I now specialise in workplace stress management and employee well-being. So moving on quickly, this is what we're going to be covering, your stress response system, because when we understand how it works, we can start to make positive changes. Recognising some of the signs and the symptoms of stress overload. Moving on to how that stress can start to overwhelm. So looking at how triggers and pinch points start to develop. And then into the good stuff, into building resilience. So looking at what resilience is and how you can put the building blocks into being so that you can start to build that resilience. And then we'll end with some practical strategies and a quick recap and questions at the end. So let's begin. The Health and Safety Executive's definition of stress is that it is the adverse reaction people have to excessive pressures or other types of demands placed on them. Now, this is a rather vague statement because different people feel stress very differently, but we do all feel it. And we're going to do a little test on your stress right now. So I'd like to ask each of you to think of a joke, and I'm going to pick someone, maybe two people, just at random, to come on the screen and to tell their joke. So take a moment to think about it. It doesn't have to be particularly funny. It'd be good if it was quite short so we can get through them. But I'll give you one moment more, and then what I'll do is I'll ask my tech people at the background just to help me here. So we're going to put, I'll call out a name and then we'll pop you on screen and unmute you. Okay, hopefully you've got it. So I'm going to not actually pick anyone because that would actually be quite stressful for you. But you might have noticed during that last few seconds some physiological changes happening. Perhaps your heart rate increased, maybe your mouth went a bit dry, or perhaps your palms went a bit sweaty. Now, these are all physical signs that your stress response system is very much alive and well. So I think we can establish that everybody feels stress. Now, stress is very much part of our survival mechanism. It's the reason that we are all sitting here today, because our primitive ancestors used it to very good effect. Those who didn't either fell off cliffs, they got eaten by predators. And we're certainly living through some stressful times now. The result is maybe a raft of negative emotions, things like sadness, loneliness, anxiety, depression. Because stress doesn't respect any boundaries, not your age, your gender, your position, your seniority. It can affect all of us if we don't learn to handle it, but in our own way. Now, it's important to note as well that without stress, there would be no life. And that quote is from Hans Selye, the chap in the photograph there. Now, he is termed as a father of stress. He did experiments on predominantly rats, looking at their life expectancy with different stresses placed on them, and also their recovery from wounds. So stress is a thing that gets you up in the morning. It prompts you to achieve bigger, better things, to win those new clients, to press for promotions, to complete projects ahead of deadline. And understandably, our stress levels have been at an all-time high recently as we navigate through this pandemic. But we're also working out how we can live and work in this period whilst maintaining our well-being, both physically and mentally, because we do all want to come through this. Now, if you stop to think about it, you might realise how often you can experience an emotion that is inappropriate simply because of the situation you're in. If you think back to that moment when I said I'd be picking on someone to tell their joke. Now, in itself, telling a joke is a very harmless activity. You probably throw them out quite easily to your friends or your family. But the very idea of putting yourself in the spotlight, of going on a screen in front of people, your colleagues, friends, perhaps people you don't know, and it becomes a stressful experience. So if we stop, take a step back, have a bit more of a wider outlook, you might find that some things are not quite as bad as they seem. Now, in order to understand the real causes of stress, we first need to understand how we function. So your brain has developed over millions of years. It's very good at keeping, your ancestors alive, but it's rather imperfect for our modern day lives. Now, we can split the brain roughly into two areas. We've got the intellectual part of the brain, the upper cortex. This is the part that you're in now. It's the part we use when we interact with the world, when we're learning, when we want to make good, rational decisions that are based on a proper assessment of the situation. And it's generally quite positive when we're operating from that part. But we also have the primitive part of the brain, and that is solely concerned with our safety and our survival, in getting us through today so that we live into tomorrow. Now, the most influential part of that brain is something called the amygdala. You might have heard of the freeze, flight, fight response. And it works together with the hippocampus, which is effectively your internal filing cabinet, and it's full of all your learned templates of behavior. And also the hypothalamus, which regulates the chemical responses in your body and mind. Now, I want you just to imagine for a moment that you walk out of the room you're sitting in and you run into this wild animal. You would immediately jump into that primitive part of the brain, and you might notice some physical changes, sweaty palms, a raised heart rate, maybe a churning stomach, not unlike the moment when you thought you might have to tell the joke. And you'd take immediate action. So hopefully in this case, you'd run away. Now, under the circumstances, that is a really good decision. It preserves your life. But in our modern lives, we don't tend to face these big life or death situations. Instead, we face a kind of drip feed of lots of little things, like running late or being stuck in traffic, credit card statements arriving, job insecurities, relationship ups and downs, work deadlines. Oh, and there's of course the pandemic. Now, the pandemic has caused some really unique issues for all of us. Changes in how we live and work, And we're facing the very real risk of contracting the virus. There's wide-scale economic uncertainty, worries about the future. And the thing about change and uncertainty is that it is scary. Each time we face a change, whatever it is, no matter whether it's big or small, it triggers the same stress response as if it's a real life danger, that wild animal sitting outside your room. And all of these things accumulate. To a greater or lesser extent, that primitive brain will keep stepping in to try and help you out, only it's not terribly helpful. And that's because that part of the brain will always rely on that freeze, flight, fight mode. And we can translate that into our modern day symptoms of depression, anxiety, anger. Now, that brain is also always negative. If you think about it, it has to be for your self-preservation. If you were running into wild animals on a daily basis, you wouldn't want it to be deciding whether it looks like it's full, whether you're not its normal prey, it's not at lunchtime. You want an immediate reaction, in that case, to run away. It's also obsessional. Now, if you had wild animals outside, you would probably want to keep checking. You'd be reminded of it constantly. And that's really about keeping our immediate environment secure. And it's also vigilant. If there is that perception of danger outside, well, you'd be wise to stay on red alert. And when we have stress in one area of our lives, we tend to have stress in others. Because we are on that high alert, we are literally looking for trouble. And it will always rely on our past patterns of behavior. If what you did yesterday meant you survived, well, you're going to be encouraged to do it again. Now, that primitive part of the brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. Look what happened when you thought that you might possibly be going on screen to tell a joke. Now, we humans are really good at misusing our imaginations. If you spend a lot of time worrying about the future, about what other people think, about what's going to happen, or perhaps ruminating about the past, all those should have, would have, could have, you activate the same physical response as though it was really happening. You start to release stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and that keeps you ready in that freeze, flight, fight mode. Now, I'd like you to imagine that you have a metaphorical bucket in your head, and it's constantly being filled up with all these thoughts about real life events and also all those imagined ones too. You can understand that eventually that bucket is going to get rather full, and that's when you start to see the impact of stress overload. You might find yourself becoming a bit irritable. You have physical signs, maybe skin rashes. It can even impair your immune system. You might start feeling a bit overwhelmed. Effectively, the less space you have in that stress bucket, the less capacity you have to cope. So the key to managing your stress levels is really about managing your stress bucket. And that gives you the capacity to cope and also to go on and build resilience. So moving on to looking at some of the signs and symptoms. Now, take a moment just to reflect on your own experiences of being stressed. What signs or symptoms did you notice or exhibit? And this is not symptom bingo, by the way. You don't get prizes for having the most of any of these signs on the list. The list is not exhaustive either. You might have some that are not on there. These are just the most common ones. So we can split them over the physical signs or symptoms. So you might recognize that pounding heart when you get a little bit stressed. Perhaps palms go sweaty. Anything to do with your digestive system is very much impacted by stress. That's because when our stress response system is switched on, it switches off all of our kind of non-essential systems like digestion, reproduction, also your immune system. So you might get things like indigestion, upset stomach, fatigue, maybe feeling a bit nauseous. You might notice tension in your muscles, particularly around the neck, the shoulders, the jawline, as we kind of hold ourselves in these tension positions. And that can also lead to things like tension headaches. And sleep as well is very, very impacted by stress. You might find yourself not being able to go to sleep at night, or perhaps waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, feeling wide awake, a little bit miserable, you can't get back to sleep again. Or perhaps waking up really early, 4:30, 5 o'clock, can't get back to sleep. Or perhaps even oversleeping. Now, oversleeping is linked to feelings of low mood, moving into depression. It feels like no matter how much you sleep, you just can't catch up and you're feeling fatigued all the time. Under behavioural symptoms and signs, you probably find you've lost concentration, your focus is a bit off, have difficulty making decisions, feel a bit disorganised. Snapping and losing our temper is really common as well, particularly to your close family. We tend to take it out on people who are closest to us. You might find yourself habitually indulging in negative self-talk, maybe even moving into a bit of imposter syndrome. And you could be relying on addictions to help you switch off. Now, it's been well reported that the sales of alcohol and things like chocolates, crisps have all gone up over lockdown as people try and find a bit of escape, some way of switching off from what's happening outside. And emotionally, you might feel a bit low, feeling irritable, edgy, anxious, maybe nervous or fearful. You definitely lose your normal sense of humour. There's not much to feel, like laughing about if you're feeling stressed. Feeling a bit unmotivated, maybe even going into depression. So we can feel a lot of different things and also in different ways. So how does stress overwhelm us? What causes that stress overload? And why do some people cope so much better in stressful situations than others? Well, a lot of it depends on how much is already in that stress bucket. Remember, the fuller it is, the less capacity you have to cope. And also remember that it's not necessarily one big event that causes that stress, but a build-up of lots of little things that can make you feel stressed. So it can be quite hard to identify what it actually is or to be able to verbalize it to others. And it's not necessarily the actual events that we face that cause us to feel stressed, anxious, or depressed, but rather our own thought patterns around it. So feelings of stress are normally triggered by things happening in your life, which may involve being under too much or prolonged pressure. Facing big changes like serious illness or major life events. Now, even the good ones are stressful, like getting married, moving house, new jobs. Worrying about events or other people. We feel social fear as well as physical fear, and it manifests in exactly the same way. Not having much or any control over the outcome of a situation. Having responsibilities that you might find overwhelming. Now, new parenthood is a classic example of that. You're handed this kind of pink wriggling baby and you don't really know what to do with it, and there's no manual that comes with them. Also, not having enough work or activities or enough challenges in your life can be stressful. And also certainly during times of uncertainty, such as the pandemic that we're in now. And we can plot these things on a sort of chart. It's a human function curve. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got our needs not being met. So we have low pressure and low performance. And that's when we feel a bit disconnected from life, feeling bored, a bit anxious, depressed. We're not really doing much about thriving in our lives. But as we move up that chart, as we move up that line, we move into the stretched zone. And this is, where all our needs are met. It's a psychologically safe area to live and work in. We feel that we're living life to the full, that life has meaning and purpose. We feel exhilarated by it. But we have to be careful about moving too far up the curve and hitting that stress hump. And that's when we start feeling exhausted, where we get health problems, where we can go down into or break down. We feel frustrated, that we're feeling stressed, we're losing control, and that's really because our needs are not being met. And we might find then that we're moving into things like anxiety, anger, depression, those addictive behaviours. So remember, anxiety, anger and depression are effectively your freeze, flight, fight mode. Now, the key really is to stay in that middle zone, in that stretched zone, but not stray into the stressed zone. So, moving on to building resilience. Now, the World Health Organization's definition of resilience is that it is related to processes and skills that result in good individual and community health outcomes in spite of negative events or serious threats and hazards. Now, in order to remain in that stretched zone, we need to build resilience so that we keep stretching without tipping over into the stress zone. It's really about leveling up. Now, if you think about an old-fashioned computer game like Pac-Man or Super Mario or Donkey Kong, you had to get through each level before moving on up to the next, which you needed to have more skills to be able to complete. And resilience is about surviving each level, but it's also about building on your strengths and your skills, being flexible and having a degree of perseverance to be able to move on up to that next level. Now, the good news is resilience is not a fixed trait. You can tap into your resilience muscle by changing certain thoughts and behaviors. It's really about having a lower stress response in adversity, so in other words, managing that stress bucket well, and improving our performance. And that's when we come out not just surviving, but thriving. This quote from Nelson Mandela kind of sums up resilience. Do not judge me by my success. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again. So resilience can be split into these three categories: physical, emotional, psychological. And they're your pillars, with the foundation being your stress response system. The less stressed you are, the more capacity you have to cope and develop these resilience pillars. And stress is actually integral to actually building the resilience as well. In principle, it's about mastering the law of progressive overload. Resilience is built through applying small amounts of stress and stimuli incrementally so that you stay stretched but not stressed. So I want to tell you a fable about a famous Greek wrestler called Milo of Croton. He lived in the 6th century BC, and he was famed for his epic strength, skill, and power. Now, in the story, he regularly carried a full-size half-ton bull on his shoulders as he casually strolled about through town. How did he do that? He started by carrying a calf. Every day he carried a baby cow on his shoulders, and as it grew, so too did his strength, until he was carrying the full-sized version. Through progressive stress placed on his body, he improved his physical resilience. And that principle translates into other types of resilience. Let's take emotional resilience. Now, imagine you're at your first important meeting. Let's pretend that it's actually in person. And there are really important clients there, and you have to stand up and give a talk or do a presentation. You want to impress. But did you realize that from the moment you started communicating with people around you as a baby, you have been in training for this moment? Slowly, through increasing your exposure, your stress loading so incrementally that you probably didn't even notice. Because every time you interacted with your family, with other children at nursery, every question you were asked and answered in school, when you moved on to college, to university, when you sat in interviews, when you talked to people, when you interacted in groups, or you had one-to-ones with people. Until here you are, standing up and talking in front of this group. You maybe feel a bit nervous about it, but it's not so bad that you can't do it. And that is the law of progressive overload in everyday action. Now, before you all go out and start hefting cows around, it is important to understand the role of stress in all this. Having a full stress bucket will hold you back in that reactive freeze, flight, fight mode, and you're unable then to move on up to the next level. So managing your stress levels is the first step in building resilience. So back to those 3 types of resilience. You've probably heard about emotional resilience. It refers to how we are able to manage the impact of stress in difficult or traumatic times in our lives. Then we have psychological resilience, and that's that ability to think on your feet, to generate alternative solutions, thoughts, or ideas. And we have physical resilience. That refers to our fitness, our health, and your continued good health is an important element of overall resilience, both in your body and mind. We also have other resiliences too, like community resilience, and that's how well you cope and bounce back as a collective of individuals. For example, how well you're doing as a company through the pandemic and your support of each other. But it does start with looking after your individual resilience. Now, limited options lead to limited solutions, and resilience helps you to expand yourself, which expands those options. If you do a little self-assessment, you might recognize your own resilience in some of these areas. We all have inherent resilience. This is our natural resilience with which we're born, and it protects us, it informs us. It's how we discover and explore the world, for instance, through play. This sort of natural resilience occurs a great deal in children under the age of 7. And throughout our lives, we then develop our learned resilience, which is built up over time when we learn and we grow and develop the mechanisms for managing and finding our inner strengths, some of which we might even not know we had. And we also have adapted resilience. Now, this type of resilience occurs at different points in our lives, and it's usually brought through a difficult or challenging experience. For instance, being made redundant and then going out the next day finding a new job, or perhaps the end of a relationship and then rebuilding your sense of confidence so that you can go out and meet someone new. Adaptive resilience is an accelerator. You make leaps in resilience building rather than just those incremental changes due to stress loading. So, moving swiftly on to practical strategies. Now, we are all capable of retraining our brains away from negative thinking, promoting a more positive mindset, which helps us to manage our stress levels and move into thriving through resilience. And all of those templates of behaviour that cause us to act in certain ways were made by us, and therefore they can be changed or even removed completely by us. Managing stress is not about avoiding or removing stress from your life, but learning to cope with it so that it doesn't overwhelm you or pull you under. Because you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So the first strategy, lean into adversity. So act on adverse situations as much as you can. Take decisive action rather than detaching from the problems and stresses or wishing that they would all just go away, because that rarely happens. And you can waste a huge amount of emotional, physical, cognitive energy railing against a situation when you'll be much better off using all of that energy to work through the situation. Change your internal chemistry. Now remember all of that cortisol and adrenaline that's released when you're stressed. Well, we can influence the balance of hormones within by promoting the release of more positive ones, particularly the hormone serotonin, the so-called happy hormone or your mood stabilizer. Now, when we have a constant flow of serotonin, it helps to cap the release of cortisol and it helps you to cope better. And we release serotonin when we do these three things. When we do positive interaction, because we are better and happier when we're part of a community than we are as individuals. We evolve to seek out the company of others, to form tribes and to connect. Positive activity. So just moving your body a little bit every day. We release endorphins, which are your natural painkillers as well. And positive thinking. Now, this is really just focusing on the good things in your life. So training yourself away from the negatives. Remember that primitive part of the brain is predisposed to be negative. And when we do these things, it becomes a positive cycle of positive behaviors and thinkings, which lead to us feeling good. And that reduces your sensitivity to stress. So multitasking. We live in an era of constant interruptions from email, telephones, text, social media apps, other people. And multitasking is a much misunderstood term. We believe it to mean that we can deal with more than one task at a time. But in fact, we can only focus on one thing at a time. What happens is we become very adept at switching our attention quickly. However, this is energy sapping for the brain. It leaves us at the end of the day feeling quite exhausted and yet as if little has been achieved. So learning to switch off those notifications and also close down tabs on your computers so that you go and check your emails, you check those notices when you want to, not when you're being told to do it. Also doing little behavioural changes like putting your phone completely out of sight when you're working, so in a bag or a drawer. It just removes the distraction completely. And planning out your tasks, so writing things out so you can see what's a priority rather than trying to keep everything in your head. We can only keep around between 5 and 9 items alive in our minds. When something new comes in, well, something has to drop off that list. Don't attach to outcomes. So this scene might be familiar to you. You worked hard on a project, or you sweated over the proposal, and you prepared that presentation, and you just pressed the send button, or you just delivered your closing statement. And now it's out of your hands. So it's time to let go of the outcome, because once you have done your best, you can do no more. Learning to step away from the result, whether it's good or bad, will help you to manage your stress levels. It stops you doing all of that overthinking and negative forecasting. And actually, we deal with whatever happens in real life as it happens much better than we think we will in our imaginations. Nurture your relationships. Life is really all about relationships, about building our support networks with people who support us and who you support. So involve people, listen to them. We feel good when we connect with others. Remember, it's part of releasing serotonin. Accept support and help. It also strengthens your own resilience. And helping others benefits you as the helper too. Look forwards, not backwards. Now, without a doubt, we are all shaped by our learned conditioning. All the behaviours that we picked up from our parents, from our peers, from our role models as we grew up, they create those templates of behaviour that we still use now. Now, whilst we can't alter our past experiences, we can change how we perceive them, and we can make conscious choices in our future interactions. So becoming aware of our conditioning, those learned habits, beliefs, the training through the circumstances of our upbringing, is a huge step forward in being able to change. So recognize your conditioning, question its worth. How valid is it, your reactions, your behaviors, your thoughts in your life today? Challenge yourself to see other people's points of view, and then change if needed, or don't. You might be right after all. Learning to manage that stress bucket. So remember the stress bucket, the overflowing one. It's full of all those real life experiences, all those negative thoughts. When it's full, you struggle to cope well, you feel a bit overwhelmed. Well, you might have wondered if there's a way to empty it, to prevent it from overflowing, and luckily there is. When we sleep at night, we go through a phase called REM, which is rapid eye movement, and that's your dreaming phase. It's when your brain effectively looks in the bucket, decides what it needs to keep in there, and it has all of that emotional attachment too, or whether it can just move them on out, clear up some space for new inputs. It's actually a perfect mechanism to help you manage stress. But REM is restricted to around 20% of your sleep patterns. When you have too much in your bucket, once that 20% is used up, your brain will wake you up. And that's when you're wide awake at 3 a.m. in the morning and you can't get back to sleep. So it is a balancing act of not putting too much in your bucket, but also making sure that you have good quality sleep to empty it. And understanding your unique stress footprint. So reflect on the things that trigger your stress response. They're your own learned behaviours and those templated reactions you have, and also what strategies you have to maintain your well-being. It's a good idea to focus on preventative activities and maintaining your well-being over kind of firefighting stress that threatens to overwhelm you. When you look after your body, you also look after your brain. So eating well, hydrating properly, exercising, finding time to relax all help to boost your physical and mental well-being. Remember to sleep well as well, because that is the foundation of your good health. And practice to be the person you become. The more you fall back on your stress response system, the more sensitive it becomes. So it's triggered quicker, it reacts stronger. The less you use it, the less responsive it becomes. So, and we thought we'd include this as it's the time of year when we're looking towards cooler weather and worse weather as well. And we've had a really nice long summer, but you know, after today we're having a little bit of rain. Now, part of my extensive travels for work in my previous life, it meant that I spent quite a lot of time in some of the Scandinavian countries, visiting places like Oslo, Stockholm, Reykjavik several times, also some of the more eastern cold spots like Moscow and Kiev. And the populations in these areas have learned to live through pretty cold, long, hard winters. So I thought I'd pull on some of their experiences to ensure that we all get through the next few months intact. And you might have heard of this Danish or Norwegian word, hygge, which means creating a warm atmosphere. And the Swedish also have their own version, which is lagom, and that is the right amount is best. So these are 6 little tips to survive the winter the hygge way. There is no bad weather, only bad clothes. So dress appropriately, but get outside as much as possible. Enjoy a little treat every now and again. Stuff like, a little cake with your coffee is great. It helps to warm you up from the inside, especially if you can share it with others. If anybody's interested, I have a Swedish chocolate ball recipe, which I'd be more than happy to share. Make your home a winter haven. So think about things like having blankets around, the warming food and drink you might offer, the the kind of lighting you have, whether you have lots of candles or just being able to dim your lights a bit, having lovely smells around, putting the fire on. Just like we move from our kind of summer wardrobe into our winter ones, it helps to change the mood. So we can do that with our homes as well. It can just give a little bit of an uplifting effect. And it's really getting you ready, your mindset ready to move into the next season. Extending your festivities. So if you think about all of the best bits of celebrations and Christmas, and just stretch them a little bit into the new year. So things like being with others. And I know that's tricky at the moment with the virus around, but building a sense of community with others has a positive impact on our well-being. So make winter a time of togetherness, even if it's slightly more virtual. Enjoy a weekly ritual of bliss, something like Friday nights for a film and popcorn night, or a weekly pamper evening. Again, even better if you can share it with others. And finally, indulge in a bit of colour in your home. You know, fresh flowers can make a big difference. And did you know that Sweden is the biggest buyer of tulips, as they have a tradition of decorating their homes in the winter with fresh flowers, preferably tulips. It's a very simple tip, but it can make a difference on a cold, dark winter's day. Colour has been proven to have a positive effect on your well-being. So, as well as making adjustments in your thoughts and your behaviours to prompt a positive shift, you can also engage in a variety of mind-based activities. But be aware, you cannot rely on those only if you still have that full stress bucket. It has to be a two-pronged approach. And the key to finding the techniques, the key really is finding the techniques that you enjoy and that work for you. There are lots of options, and we can place a lot of them under this kind of umbrella of meditation. Now, meditation is a way of training your mind to focus and redirect your thoughts. Many people know that it's something that can help to reduce stress. It can help to develop your concentration as well. And there's scientific evidence that regular meditation physically changes the brain by physically shrinking that amygdala, the freeze flight fight center. And that means it becomes less responsive, which results in a calmer and more relaxed you. So you have things like mindfulness, you have formal meditation, also things like focused breathing, progressive relaxation, self-hypnosis, chanting mantras, practicing gratitude journaling. There are lots of others, including going for a walk, yoga, exercise, gardening, listening to music, basically anything that is good for you for no other reason than that you find it pleasurable is meditation. Now, there can be secondary gains, of course. You could be improving your fitness, you could have a really tidy garden, but the core element is that you enjoy it. And with all of these activities, consistency is paramount, and that's why you need to find the benefit in them over just that end goal of managing stress. And being consistent, so practicing every day, but you can choose a variety of them. You don't have to just have one thing that you do. So we're going to just have a look at the focused breathing and a little bit of progressive relaxation, and hopefully as well the self-hypnosis or guided visualization. I'll invite you along to do it. You don't have to at all, but you know, it might be something you try and you enjoy that you could explore a bit further. So I'll just ask you all to sit comfortably with your feet firmly planted on the floor. You can put your hands either in your lap, by your sides, just be comfortable. And I'd ask you just to close your eyes for a moment. Breathe in through your nose, counting in your mind to 7. Pause for a moment and breathe out through your mouth, counting to 11. And pause for a moment and breathe in through your nose, counting to 7. Pause for a moment and breathe out through your mouth, counting to 11. Now, if you repeat that 6 or 7 times, it will take roughly 2 minutes. And just like you would brush your teeth for 2 minutes once, twice a day to prevent tooth decay, so practicing focused breathing like this can help to prevent stress buildup. It also becomes something that you can pull on in a moment of stress or high emotional arousal. It becomes a kind of muscle memory. You can just use it without really having to think too hard about it. And it takes roughly 2 minutes for a raised heart rate to return back to a normal beating pattern. So if you were in a moment of high emotion, you did 2 minutes of focused breathing, that would, you know, enable your heart to go back to that normal beating pattern. You could call it a fire break if you like. So moving on quickly to progressive relaxations and also self-hypnosis. Now they're very, very simple techniques you can use. Effectively, again, sitting comfortably, or you can lie down, close your eyes, focus on your breathing for a moment. And then with the progressive relaxation, you start at the top of your head. You just focus on each area as you move on down through your body. And with the self-hypnosis, once you've done that progressive relaxation, just imagine a place that you feel really comfortable. It could be somewhere you've been on holiday. It could be sitting quietly in your sitting room, maybe a time when you've really enjoyed just reading a book, watching TV, whatever it is, just somewhere that is peaceful and comfortable, and make it really vivid in your mind. You're basically transporting yourself to that time and that place, which is a calm and peaceful time. They're really good techniques to do just before you go to sleep. You know, it helps you to be mellow, to be comfortable, to be relaxed before you then move into that sleep time. So what I'd like to do is to take you through the progressive relaxation, and then I'll just see how time goes if we go into a guided visualization. So it's going to take roughly 3 to 4 minutes to do. So for the next few minutes, just forget about everything else that's happening. Again, I'd invite you to do it. You do not have to if you don't want to. If you find yourself nodding off a little bit, don't worry, you will come back to your surroundings very naturally. So if you like to make yourself comfortable, put your hands either in your lap again or by your sides. Plant your feet nicely, evenly on the floor. You could even, if you've got a sofa or a floor, you know, you can lie down if you like. So I'd ask you to close your eyes, take a deep breath in, pause and breathe out. Just focus on your breathing for a moment, slowly in and slowly out. It doesn't matter if you feel the need to move every now and again. You don't have to be absolutely still. Just be comfortable. Relax your whole body as much as you can. You might be aware of other sounds around you, sounds inside the building or outside. But these won't disturb you. In fact, they'll help to relax you, because for the next few minutes, nothing else matters. Just keep listening quietly to the sound of my voice as you begin to relax. Now, I want you to think about the top of your head. Many people don't realize that tension often starts in the little muscles of the scalp. So I want you to think about those little muscles, the skin of your scalp. Just allow them to let go and relax. Now all the muscles of your face, let them go slack. Your forehead, your eyes, your eyelids, your cheeks, mouth and jaw muscles. Just think about the skin settling, smoothing out. It might mean that your mouth opens slightly, but whatever's best for you, just let it happen. Unclenching your teeth, relaxing your tongue, because the more you physically relax, the more you can mentally relax. And thinking about your neck and shoulder muscles now into the tops of your arms, letting all tensions drain away as you think on down through your elbows, into your forearms, down through your wrists and into your hands, right the way down into the very tips of your fingers and the tips of your thumbs. Just letting all those muscles let go and relax. And now think about your breathing, noticing that you're breathing even more steadily, even more slowly as you relax more and more. So you can let any tension in the chest area simply drain away as you think on down to your stomach muscles, letting those muscles relax too. And think down into your back now. The long muscles either side of your spine, just let those muscles relax. And your waist. And your main thigh muscles as you think on down through your knees, down through the shins and calves. Just allowing all those areas to relax and let go. And as you think on down through your ankles, through your feet, and into the very tips of your toes, all the muscles in your body, beautifully relaxed and easy, feeling very lazy. And as you're feeling so relaxed there, we'll go straight into a guided meditation. So as you visualize the following scene in your mind's eye, you might find that your body, your mind becomes more and more relaxed with each moment, each word you hear. You might even find your mind wanders quite a bit, so you don't hear all the things I say, and that doesn't matter either. Because in a moment, you're going to feel more relaxed than you can remember feeling. I want you to imagine that you're in a meadow. There's big, wide open space around you. The sun is shining. Tall green grass growing up high. And you find yourself walking into the meadow now. You notice a small stream nearby. You wander to the edge of it. Gently lower yourself down onto the soft grassy bank. Just sit for a while, gazing into that cool, clear water, marveling at the sense of tranquility that sweeps over you. And you can feel the sun on your head and shoulders. It's not too hot, just comfortable. There's a gentle breeze playing against your skin, and you can feel that soft grass beneath you. You notice the sights, the sounds all around you, the grass swaying as wind whispers through it, the stream gurgling and splashing, and you can see the mixture of meadow grasses, clover, wildflowers all around you. Just imagine listening to the sounds of that meadow, hearing the birds singing, the breeze rustling, the grass softening. Just imagine how the sun feels on your face as you turn it up towards the sky, your eyes closed, enjoying the warmth of the sun on your skin. Just imagine the smell of the grass, the wildflowers, the smell of warm earth. And look around you to see it all, how the ground follows the gentle curve of the hills, the blue sky above you, a few wispy clouds drifting slowly high above. You can see trees at the edge of the meadow, and the whole meadow stretching out lush and green, a haven of peace and tranquility. You feel so relaxed here. You realize that while you're here, you are part of everything, and everything is part of you. Take a moment now to enjoy that feeling of total relaxation, and understand that this meadow is always here for you in your thoughts. You can always find it just by following that path of calmness, relaxation in your mind. So now it's time to leave the meadow. So start to bring your awareness back to the room you're in. Feel sensations returning to your fingers, your toes. Take a deep breath in and let it out. Give yourself a stretch. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes, feeling relaxed, fresh, and alert. So we've looked at the stress response system. We did a little test on yours to find out if it actually works. And we looked at how that system works, or rather overworks, which can be a nuisance. The consequences of prolonged or too much stress. And we also looked at some of the signs and symptoms that can appear. Developed an understanding of how stress begins to overwhelm, the triggers and pinch points that indicate when we've moved from stretched into stressed. And then we moved to look at resilience and how that's built through progressive loading, using your inherent, learned, and adaptive experiences. And some strategies to reduce stress and maintain well-being. So we've survived as a species thanks to our emotional freeze, flight, fight, survival brain, but emotional arousal can be an absolute nuisance. Any strong emotion will always spotlight the danger to the detriment of everything else. It's important to manage your stress level so that it works for you to build that resilience, not against you and keeping you stuck. And we all have this primitive survival mechanism. We all suffer from these emotional hijacks at times. They inhibit our ability to think clearly. And when we can't think clearly, well, we can't perform well. So developing your self-awareness so that you understand when you are overstretching, moving into that stress hump area is the first step towards managing it. And this is a process just like any other to develop the skills of stress management and building resilience. You just might surprise yourself along the way. So remember, resilience isn't cultivated by avoiding stress, but learning how to tame and master it. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to unshare my screen now and let's take a moment to see if there were any questions. Hi.
I've got a few questions actually. So the first one was regarding multitasking. Is it true that it's okay to walk whilst we are in a meeting / doodle that actually this can help more with being present?
So movement is a really good thing actually. So because you're switching on different aspects of your brain, when you move, you have to switch on your spatial awareness, things like your balance. So you actually do take on board things in a different way. But you can still be fairly distracted from things. It depends. You do have to focus on the focus, basically. I don't know if any of you. I mean, I sometimes listen to podcasts when I'm walking my dog, and I can tell you that there are times if my attention switches to what my dog is doing, then I'll miss chunks of what's being said. So your brain can only focus on the one thing at a time. But we do things like walking automatically. And when we're in that kind of autopilot mode, as long as we don't have to focus on anything else, then it can activate different parts of the brain, which do help you to focus, as long as you can keep your focus in that one direction. It's actually a really good thing to do if you have to learn things. I mean, I do a lot of talks. I used to be live in person. I used to not have to have notes and things. So I used to walk my dogs and learn my talks, and it would really go in really well.
Thank you. I think there was another question surrounding the change of seasons. So do you have any advice for people who might be feeling unmotivated and struggling to find this time to actually get out? Because obviously we're all working from home at the moment. Do you have any advice for any of the viewers?
Yeah, I mean, there is, some people might have clinical disorders. There's seasonal affective disorder, which basically is when we have less sunlight available, you do go into that kind of low mood period. You can buy things like blue lights, which will help to, just lift your mood. It helps to rebalance some of your hormones. Now, funny enough, I mean, in Sweden, for instance, they completely changed their working day in relation to the winter. So they will start work at 7:30 and finish at 3 just to make the most of the afternoon. But of course, we're not kind of in that mode. But if you can get out at the weekends, that really helps. It is managing it and keeping perspective. We all know that winter will come, but it also goes. So we're not stuck in it forever. So if you can keep that broader outlook and think, well, this is just for now, maybe this is a good time for a bit of hunkering down, a bit of kind of doing more low-key things. Always reach for things that you enjoy doing as well. Anything that will increase your levels of serotonin, help to lift your mood. Just don't have an over expectation of feeling kind of really energetic as you might do in the summer. So just adjust your expectation a little bit.
Thank you. I think that was really good advice. There is another question here from Ms. Rigby. Thank you for asking. Are there any meditation techniques for people who find that when trying classic meditation, they can't stop their brain from racing to one thing to another?
Yeah. The key thing to do is something that you enjoy. Now, a lot of people really struggle with just sitting still and trying to switch off. It's really difficult. So things like audio meditations are good because it's guided. So you don't have to think about not thinking, if you see what I mean. You just follow what you're being told to do. I've got some free ones. I'm more than happy to share those with you. The other thing is that meditation does not necessarily need to be still. You can do moving meditation. So you can do things like very gentle movements that you incorporate. So that helps to focus you away from all of those whirling thoughts and just pull you back in. If you find that you do keep going back to it, then it's just finding something else to hook into. So then regrounding into your breathing, so refocusing on your breathing. The 7-11 technique that I went through is really useful because when you fill your brain with numbers, you don't have room, because you can't multitask, for the whirling thoughts. So it does help to cut those thoughts off if you're filling your brain with something else. And our brains love numbers, because they're logical. We all know that 2 comes after 1 and then it's 3 or 4. So it's a very logical process. But it's trying a few different techniques and seeing what works for you and that you enjoy doing. You get some benefit in the now, not just that, oh, I know I've got to do it because it's good for me and long term it will be good. But also learn, just push through it a little bit, just keep trying it for a short period of time. And then if it's really not working, then look for something else.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. Just to note, someone has asked, is it possible to have the recording of the guided relaxation? That's absolutely fine. After this, I will send everyone who attended and registered the link to this, and I don't mind cutting it down either to the meditation, just to answer that question. I think that was
I've also got that as a short recording, so anyway, so I can send that. So, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And just for me, I've got one question. You mentioned your phone usage, which I think is really, really interesting for managing stress. Do you have any advice on how to really sort of minimize your phone usage throughout the day, and how to distract that? I think that might be quite a useful thing.
Yeah, putting parameters around it is really important. It's really easy to use it all the time. The more you use it, the more used to you are to using it, so it becomes second nature. So saying, right, first thing in the morning, when I say first thing, don't do it straight, as you wake up. There are studies that more people say hello to their phones than they do to their partners who are lying in bed with them next to them. So say 9 o'clock for 20 minutes or half an hour, that's your phone checking time. Once that time is finished, you then put it away. Then again, check it, 11:30, 12 o'clock, that's your phone time for half an hour, then you put it away. So it's making it more formal rather than just having it there all the time. We've seeged into having them in our lives. I am old enough to remember before phones, and we didn't rely on them. When I first was given my first phone, I thought, well, why do I want this? Why do I need a phone? And now, of course, you don't leave home without it. It's become integral to our lives. But what we haven't done really is learned how to manage our usage of it. It's just entered our lives. So it's really about what you want out of it. So rather than being driven by what the phone is doing, you are driving your own behaviors into it. I don't know if you've heard of Pavlov's dogs, the experiment by the Russian scientist. He set a metronome going, so whenever he fed the dogs, they would hear the sound and it triggered their saliva response. Well, we're having exactly the same response with our phones. Every time we hear it ding or buzz, we're being given a little bit of cortisol, which pushes us to go and look at it. When we look at it, we get a little release of dopamine, which is your reward hormone. So that means it's a good thing. So we have that cycle of using it, and it's just breaking that cycle and taking control of it, really.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful, especially for me. Does anyone else have any questions before we end the webinar? I can't see that any come up, but I think there was an attendee that raised their hand. If anyone wants to come along and ask Geraldine a direct question, now's the time. Hold on. Okay, we've got one person, Geraldine, so I'm just going to invite them on and stop mine, okay?
I think they've gone swimming.
Okay, hold on. I'll start on mute. Okay. I'm not too sure if this person
Okay. They probably have a joke to tell. They were desperate to.
But yeah, okay. So no more questions at the moment from what I can see. Okay, Geraldine, so I'll pass on back to you, okay?
So I think we are at the end of it, and thank you very much for attending. As I said, I've got things like the guided visualizations, the relaxations, all of those are available. I'll obviously send them through to the relevant people and they can be distributed out. If anybody would like the Swedish chocolate ball recipe, it's a really nice, easy thing to have, a nice thing to eat, have with a cup of coffee. But apart from that, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you found it useful, and if nothing else, an impetus to just go and explore some techniques that you really enjoy doing. Thank you very much.